Welcome back, my fellow apostates or just curious people about Jehovah's Witnesses. Welcome back to the Surviving Paradise podcast. This is becoming a regular thing. Who knew? I definitely did not. So I really appreciate the encouragement. I think I start every week that way, but I really do want to express that I appreciate all the kind words, the private notes, the notes on YouTube, the notes on the social media sites. Really great to meet such a wonderful group of people and I guess what really blows me away is from all over the world. So it's really fantastic to meet all of you. Thanks for all the encouragement. This week, I thought that I would tackle some things that have been on my mind. And God, I mean, let's be honest, the things I will tackle in this episode have been on my mind for decades. And now that I am a full-fledged mentally diseased apostate who's been gone from Jehovah's Witnesses for many, many years now, it is time to take some of this information, share the thoughts of me as a young kid, me as a young adult, me as an adult, and get some of the feedback from you great people. And look, the truth of the matter is nobody wants to feel like they're the only person who's had some of these thoughts. So I think some of this will be a lot of fun. So I thought this week we would tackle the subject that probably is never ending for Jehovah's Witnesses, and it's the subject of hypocrisy. Did I say that with enough enunciation? Hypocrisy. And when you look at Jehovah's Witnesses, the fact is this: their entire religion, their way of life, their culture, their attitudes, the decisions they make are literally just riddled with hypocrisy. And this has been something that has troubled me for many, many years. In fact, I want to start out just by talking about the definition of hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is a very serious thing. The Bible says that in many places and cases, a person who is a practicing hypocrite is worthy of death. Not lost on me, the irony there. But let's define hypocrisy. Hypocrisy, by definition, the practice of claiming to have moral standards or beliefs to which one's own behavior does not conform. Pretense, fake ass behavior is basically what it comes down to. And I want to back up a little bit because people have been sending me notes, which I greatly, again, appreciate, and give you just a quick bio. And again, like I stated from the very beginning, this is really just a peek into my mind over many, many years as a person who was raised a Jehovah's Witness, who went through the teenage years as a Jehovah's Witness, became a ministerial servant, a longtime elder, was used at very high levels within the organization, at least at the time, and just kind of give you a peek at what was knocking around inside this skull, even throughout all of those experiences. So back to hypocrisy, a little bit on me. If you're just now joining the Surviving Paradise podcast, I was raised a Jehovah's Witness. And after 40 years in the organization, over 11 of them as a congregation elder, it's interesting how many people ask of me what it was that finally woke me up, what it was that just jolted me to my senses and caused me to make a quick exit from the only religion and the only social circle that I really had known for many years. We'll get into my childhood and teenage years, but for the most part, taking your whole life and upending it, tossing it upside down. What was it? What was it that caused me to do that? It's interesting. I've pondered that question many times over the years, and it wasn't really as simple as one thing that tipped me into a new state of mind. It wasn't one devastating event or one mind-numbing revelation that pushed me toward the door. It was really actually a combination of two things that had really gnawed at me for most of my life, including thoughts and feelings that I had going all the way back to childhood at a very young age in the late 70s, as I was raised mostly in the Bay Area in California, then moved to the Pacific Northwest. You might ask, what are those two things? And this is way too simple. But the two things really came under those umbrellas of hypocrisy and what was really an obvious lack of love among Jehovah's Witnesses. I know the irony is that you can pull up watchtowers from going back decades where they proclaim they're the most loving people on earth. How you measure that, how you even remotely define that, just staggers the mature mind that you can make such a statement. Nonetheless, the lack of love, which will be the subject of far too many podcast episodes moving forward, as will the one we're going to cover tonight, which is hypocrisy. Those were the two things that really pushed me towards the door in really about 2007 and then out the door for good in February of 2009. Now, listen, I realize that those may sound too simple, and I mentioned lack of love is a massive subject that has to be unpacked and tackled in reference to Jehovah's Witnesses, basically due to their claims that not only are the most loving people on earth, but they're also Christians, or so they claim to be. But for now, I just want to just kind of focus in and share some of these thoughts on hypocrisy that so greatly devastate the lives of Jehovah's Witnesses, but it's actually encouraged. Hypocritical behavior is encouraged by the governing body. Don't come at me with Toni Morris getting caught in liquor stores buying very expensive scotch. That's been covered. It's hilarious. Drinking is a massive subject matter among Jehovah's Witnesses. And I want to get it out of the way right away that here we are, people that are apostates. We're seen as the most evil among the evil that have left Jehovah's Witnesses. I want to get right out of the way that Jesus Christ himself, who any Jehovah's Witness would look you in the eye and say is our king. We follow his example to a T. He is our everything. He is the greatest man that's ever lived. He is God's son. Jesus Christ himself, folks, go ahead and pull up the four Gospels, use the New World Translation if that's what you want to do. Jesus Christ himself, his entire ministry was, well, to apostates. The most ironic, hypocritical, most gigantic hypocrisy is the way Jehovah's Witnesses treat people that have left Jehovah's Witnesses or are questioning or want to leave as apostates, when Jesus himself and his entire life on record in the inspired book of God is himself spending countless hours his entire life with apostates, apostate Jews. It was his one and only ministry. He said it himself. He was sent first to the house of Abraham. The Jews had completely apostatized away from their God, Jehovah, Yahweh, and Jesus spent countless hours among them. So let's throw that out. Let's throw out the big one, and we'll come back to that in the future. But let's focus on some that I find incredibly entertaining. Some of them are really funny and absurd and just make you bang your head against a wall. Others are deadly and dangerous, which is, it's almost like that's woven throughout every episode of this podcast and every subject you could find with Jehovah's Witnesses. Some of these are going to make you laugh. Some of these are going to infuriate you. Nonetheless, as a young man, I found my mind drifting to one question. I even had that asked. If you could ask Jehovah one question, Stacy, what would that question be? I would pause, and there were other people, throwing out their questions in these little guy groups. What happened to dinosaurs? Will people get married again in paradise? Will I be able to drive a Porsche in the paradise? Will I have a mansion? How many wives will I have? These are the kind of questions most people ask to show you what kind of a whacked kid I was. They would look at me and go, what would your question be? And my question would just be simple. Why? Why? You're perfect. You got it all. You're beyond the scope of the universe itself. I would ask Jehovah, why? So I come at every one of these subject matters as, why? Give me the motive. That's how I live my life. That's how I think. That's how I tend to treat other people. I tend to look for motive, for desire first. Put the analytics aside. But my question would be why? And today, I don't think there's a more appropriate question, as simplistic as it is, to ask the 8 guys in upstate New York, the governing body, now known as the faithful and discreet slave of Jehovah's Witnesses. My question would be, why? If you turn to the Bible on this matter of hypocrisy or doubt, and let's just start with doubt, because it plays a role in hypocrisy. At 1 John 4:1, and we'll quote the New World Translation to make those listening that are Jehovah's Witnesses or those that may be curious. 1 John 4:1 says, "Beloved ones, do not believe every inspired statement, but test the inspired statements to see whether they originate with God. For many false prophets have gone out into the world." So for this guy at an early age, I want to be candid. Through my older years and as a teenager, I was every bit a teenager. I played sports, single parent family. I played sports in high school. I chased cute girls. I did things with cute girls that was considered very bad. I drank alcohol. I partied. I did all of those things. But for the most part, if you look at my life, I was shaped by the scriptures. Boy, does that sound like hypocrisy. But I really did, as I grew older, hold the Bible and the scriptures as an authority in shaping my life, my personality. Despite all the sins and the things that I went through, I took it all very seriously. And that especially came true after I got out of high school and was moving closer to being an elder at the very ripe and experienced age of 27. Yes, that's ironic. But I took that appointment very seriously. It was trumped really by having a type A personality, my strongest goal in my mind once I got out of high school, which shows, God, it's brutal to say this. Is this a strain of narcissism? It's insane to say this about yourself. But I really wanted to be like Jesus. I wanted to be kind, compassionate, approachable, caring, empathetic. I really do believe that motive, that why, made me a good elder at that time among Jehovah's Witnesses. However, it was also where the rub began for me personally. As a young man and then as a mature servant of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, there was never a time I could wrap my mind around several things that made no sense or weren't rooted in Scripture. So let's take a look at a few examples. I hope you're in the least bit entertained. I hope if you're curious, you find something that you can take away from this. Let's look at some examples of Jehovah's Witnesses going Hypocrisy 101. I covered the biggest one. Jesus hangs out and talks to apostates. Imagine that. But now we're going to look at what I would consider smaller ones, some of them. Let's take my first one, and boy, is this a personal favorite. Are you ready for this? Beards. Full disclosure, I have a beard now. I like it. I think as I age, it helps me hide all the wrinkles. I don't know. Beards are great. Beards are fantastic. Did I mention beards are natural? They grow there. Jehovah's Witnesses, if this is the first time you're being exposed to this, are dead set against beards. Goatees. Full beards, small beards, neatly trimmed beards. As you browse through Watchtower literature and you look at photographs, you will quickly notice that anyone that is a sinner or a non-believer or evil is oftentimes identified with facial hair. It's one of the craziest things you will ever see. But bad people can be easily separated from the good people in Watchtower land because the bad guys have facial hair and the good guys are very familiar with a Bic razor. If your first reaction is, what? What? You're not alone. You see, why the world is fighting off demonic hordes led by Satan the devil himself in these last days of all of human history, while the world is dealing with rampant disease, debilitating depression, starving children, famines, poverty, crime, injustice. Jehovah's Witnesses and the guys with a direct phone line to God and Jesus himself were worrying about Facial hair. Facial hair. This is a thing among Jehovah's Witnesses. Facial hair, and specifically beards, was my personal first introduction to Christianity a la carte, which I brought that up in a prior episode. That began to be my phrase. Oh, we pick some things from the Bible and we hold on to them for life and death, and within sentences of that is something else that we just completely ignore. Christianity a la carte. Pick and choose what you want and eat that. So as a boy, I questioned why God's chosen nation of Israel, Jews, had beards. Why my king, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, had a beard. Why great men of faith had beards. Noah, David, you name it. Why the founder of Jehovah's Witnesses, Charles Taze Russell, had a beard. But Jehovah's Witness men weren't allowed to even think about having a beard. Here's where that hypocrisy and that Christianity a la carte comes in. The example of beards, as stupid and inane and silly as that is, was really a beginning point for me. It was the beginning of my critical thinking turning on a little bit. None of the elders or adults in the congregation could explain to me, even as a kid, why we weren't allowed to have facial hair. There was a time when mustaches were seen as really bad in some congregations of Jehovah's Witnesses. Older ones in the congregation would waffle and say, well, come on now, Stacy, that isn't an important matter. Or, will that matter in paradise? But I wasn't satisfied with such ridiculous and elusive reasoning. So I took to research and the Bible. Imagine my surprise. The Bible makes no command for absence of facial hair. In fact, it makes just the opposite. The hypocrisy of the following was not lost on me, and it was this issue that made me coin the phrase Christianity a la carte. In other words, picking and choosing what you will apply or ignore, as if parts of the Bible had values, others was completely useless, within sentences of each other. In an effort to make sure no one got a tattoo, boy, is that a good episode. Yep. And another crazy example, tattoos. The Watchtower and Bible and Tract Society reverts, yes, I said reverts, to the Mosaic Law to support God's view against tattoos. Never mind that the Mosaic Law was thrown out by Jesus himself. The guys in upstate New York, the 8 dudes, they decide, well, now's a good time to implement the Mosaic Law. What? Significantly, the Mosaic Law forbade God's people to tattoo themselves, said Leviticus 19:28. You must not make cuts in your flesh for a deceased soul, and you must not put tattoo markings upon yourselves. I am Jehovah. That is from the Awake of 2003, September 22nd, page 26. Openly stating the Mosaic Law forbade God's people to tattoo themselves. They quote Leviticus 19:28 and make sure you know that Jehovah hates tattoos. However, this guy noticed the verse just before the tattoo one, verse 28 of Leviticus 19. Leviticus 19:27 says this: you must not cut your side locks short around, and you must not destroy the extremity of your beard. Oops. What? Wait a minute, what? Never mind that the entire Mosaic Law was considered imperfect and a tutor leading to Jesus himself. Never mind that Jehovah had abolished the Mosaic Law at his son's death, including, you remember, supernatural events in the temple, the tent in the tabernacle rent in two, the holy earthquakes. Never mind that God made his point clear. Mosaic Law is gone. We're not going to follow that anymore. The 8 guys in New York decided Jehovah told them something different. Yeah, you're following. Never mind that history shows those tattoos in ancient times were also pagan markings for other religious purposes. Throw all of that out and consider the obvious here. One verse applies where it's convenient. The verse right before it does not. If you're thinking, what? You're not alone. How could anybody justify that stance? And so Christianity a la carte was born for this kid. And it has long been one of my favorite examples of the gross hypocrisy of Jehovah's Witnesses. It's something that has followed me for many, many, many years. And I want to tell you, you may be wondering at this point, because we could literally do an entire episode on beards. And I don't want to get into that because the Watchtower actually does somewhat in vague passive aggressive terms talk about why it doesn't allow beards. But in case you were wondering, I'll just give you a reference. You could take a look. And it literally comes down to this, folks. I'm just going to be a teaser. Go check it out. The 1974 Watchtower Yearbook has this account, pages 97 and 98, in print from, again, the faithful and discreet slave of Jehovah's Witnesses. It says this, relating in a situation at the factory in Brooklyn where the head guy, Jesus' right-hand man at the time, Joseph Rutherford, the judge, was in charge. In the factory, they needed equipment. Again, 74 yearbook, page 97 to 98. It says this, but more equipment was needed. For that reason, Brother Balzerite asked Brother Rutherford for permission to buy a rotary press. Brother Rutherford saw the necessity and agreed, but on one condition. He had noticed that over the years, Brother Balzerite had grown a beard, very similar to the one that had been worn by Brother Russell. If you're sensing the low self-esteem and insecurity, you would be correct. That's for me. Back to the yearbook. His example soon caught on, for there were others who also wanted to look like Brother Russell. This could give rise to a tendency towards creature worship. That's right, facial hair. And Brother Rutherford wanted to prevent this. So during his next visit, within hearing of all the Bible House family, I mean, imagine Jesus' right-hand guy has to go straight passive-aggressive here. So he starts speaking loud so everyone can hear him. He tells Brother Balzerite that he could buy the rotary press to print his books. What? But only on the condition that he shave off his beard. Brother Balzerite sadly agreed and afterward went to the barber. During the next few days, there were several cases of mistaken identity and some funny situations because of the stranger who was sometimes not recognized by his fellow workers. 1974 yearbook. Their print, inspired. Pages 97 and 98. That paragraph alone tells you all you need to know about beards, hypocrisy, and where it started, because it goes back decades. Imagine the president being so passive-aggressive and so insecure about the guy who came before him and had now been dead for many years. He didn't want anyone to look like him, but instead of laying down a command, he did it by speaking loud in the factory so everyone could hear him. He bribed the guy, shave off your beard and I'll buy you a press to print my books? What? One of the most twisted stories in the history of Jehovah's Witnesses, and leads to the gross hypocrisy and the ongoing tradition to this day that Jehovah's Witness men can't wear beards. This is but one example, and you could fill pages and pages and pages of books, diaries, writings, blogs, you name it, with examples of hypocrisy, all driven by men, their double standards, their lies, you name it. Outsiders wonder, just using that example as beards, they wonder, how can Jehovah's Witnesses not see this stuff? I've said it before, and you're going to hear me say it many times on this podcast. The vast majority of Jehovah's Witnesses don't study. They don't read. They don't read their own literature. They don't read the Bible. They simply adopt whatever they hear from the stage at a kingdom hall, a circuit assembly, a district convention, or from other Jehovah's Witnesses. Just being associated with the organization frees their conscience to do very little in the way of study or research. They will simply keep regurgitating what they hear at meetings. They'll simply obey the field service schedule, and they'll just press on, raising their hand like drones, answering the question without ever knowing where it comes from. See, many people hear this and they dismiss this dynamic. It's no big deal. I can assure you that much of the Watchtower's hypocrisy has led to everything from poor self-image to death. To death. And keep in mind and remember that they claim that they are God's only representative here on the earth, those 8 guys in upstate New York. So the hypocrisy knows no bounds. I could fill podcasts with many examples, but there's one. I've given you 2 on this show. Jesus and his ongoing love and quality time spent with an apostate nation that witnesses can't do today. Beards in a world where tragedy and terrible things happen. We're worried about facial hair. And I got to tell you, there are some funny quotes on beards that I will come back to in the future. We'll probably do a whole episode on the beard thing because it is insane. And it was all basically built around a time period in the 20s, 30s, 40s, where the guy in charge was threatened by the guy who came before him. He wanted to stand out. He wanted everybody to be clean shaven. That's it. That's it, folks. Let's look at another example. Hypocrisy run amok among Jehovah's Witnesses. This one just cracks me up. This one's so bad and probably isn't as big an issue today as it was many years ago. Are you ready for this? I desperately wanted to find the soundtrack to the Village People from the 70s and play it right here. That's right, the YMCA. YMCA. If you are a newer witness, you're going, what? If you're an older one, this might ring a bell. The YMCA, or which is an acronym for Young Men's Christian Association, is a community-driven group which has religious ties in the United States. And they have gyms. They have gyms throughout the country. The YMCA. Village People made it most famous with their great song. I won't do that for you here, but that great song that really shined a big light on the YMCA. Now, for me, I really was most of my life a fitness freak. Really got into the gym, into lifting weights. As I mentioned, I played high school sports. Aside from the fact that playing school sports meant you weren't a good Jehovah's Witness, I was definitely seen as bad association during those years. But imagine how confusing and bizarre it was for me to learn that going to the YMCA was tantamount to worshiping Satan himself. That's right. If you're going to the YMCA to lift weights or run on the treadmill, you have sided with Satan the devil. Let's just hope you don't have a beard as well, because God, are you bad then. But here we go, folks. Here we go. It's in print. Watchtower Magazine, January 1st, 1979. I was in 7th, 8th grade right here. Page 31. Quote, in joining the YMCA as a member, a person accepts or endorses the general objectives and principles of the organization. He's not simply paying for something he receives, such as when buying things being sold to the public at a store. Nor is his membership merely an entry pass, as when a person buys a theater ticket. Membership means that one has become an integral part of this organization, founded with definite religious objectives, including the promotion of interfaith. Hence, for one of Jehovah's Witnesses to become a member of such a so-called Christian association would amount to apostasy. End quote. If you so much as went to the YMCA, ran on the treadmill for 10, 15 minutes, or just did a few dumbbell curls, you are an apostate. So any exercise near a YMCA constitutes apostasy or makes you an enemy of Jehovah God. Because I work my biceps there, I endorse anything the organization says or does. The problem I had, even as a young man and as an elder, with this hard and fast man made rule, because it's interesting, once again, they've gone well beyond the scriptures. Jesus never commented on the YMCA or gyms or anything like this. Uh, My biggest problem is, how do we justify going to a hospital? Nearly every hospital in my hometown has been built and supported by churches. In my current area, it includes Good Samaritan. It includes Emmanuel. It includes St. Vincent's. It includes Providence. Does this now mean that I can't go to a hospital if I need medical care because I'll be an enemy of God and an apostate? Folks, I can assure you that Jehovah's Witnesses all throughout the area I live in the Pacific Northwest go to all of those hospitals, all of them, including elders. But be damned if you go to the YMCA and lift some weights. You heard it in print from those guys with that direct hotline to God himself. We already covered New Light. Going to the YMCA constitutes you an enemy of God. So if you even bring this up to a witness today, here we go. That's old light. No, it was never light at all. Couldn't be new. But prepare yourself for some bizarre hemming, some hawing, as well as a cliche or two. Oh, that doesn't matter anymore. But keep in mind, people were exiled from the organization and refused love from their family for going to the YMCA. It's true. They were disfellowshipped and shunned for going to the YMCA, even though they might have went to a hospital that was supported by the same religious organization. Hypocrisy at its finest. The insanity of a man-made organization, somebody's personal opinion that had an axe to grind, as if going to the gym constitutes you an enemy of God because of the people that back it. Do we know who backs anything? Any business we might frequent? I mean, the amount of coffee shops that Jehovah's Witnesses hang out in or used to on a Saturday during field service. Do we know anything about the people that run those small businesses? Am I an enemy of God if I have coffee and a scone here? The level of control and it's this kind of stuff that so vehemently identifies them as a cult. Man-made control. Just insane. So what have we covered so far? Facial hair and going to work out at the YMCA. Two of my favorite ridiculous hypocrisies. We're going to move into a third one here that was truly controversial. And for any of us that grew up during the 70s or the 80s, even the 90s and the 2000s, it seemed like every public talk, I got to say 70, 80% of my public talk outlines, at least 80% of the Watchtower studies I conducted the Watchtower for 8 years, centered around this subject, the subject of the United Nations. It was a constant pet subject among Jehovah's Witnesses. If you've looked at any of the books written under the umbrella of the book of Revelation, you'll recognize now that the Revelation Climax book has suddenly disappeared and no longer available. I wonder why. But the United Nations was seen as the scarlet-colored wild beast in Revelation that Babylon the Great, the world empire of false religion, rode. She controlled politics with her evil, whore-like ways. When you consider the staunch stance regarding a workout at the local YMCA, you drowned in the gross hypocrisy surrounding the Watchtower Society and the United Nations. The gross hypocrisy surrounding this one subject and the discovery surrounding this subject has caused thousands of Jehovah's Witnesses to question the religion as well as the governing body, Jesus' right-hand guys. Many people have left the faith over this subject of the United Nations, over this one issue and discovery, which I'm coming to. Appallingly, many others would have no idea what you're talking about if you ask them about this situation that I'm about to relate. True proof of the level of cognitive dissonance that is rampant within this organization. So you've got one group who was paying strict attention to how evil the United Nations was, literally pounded into our heads, pounded. Watchtower studies, entire books on this. Every prophet, every minor and major prophet somehow led you to Babylon the Great and the United Nations. It was just an insane journey down the yellow brick road, if you will. But they hated it. It was evil. For several decades, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society taught millions of people that the United Nations is the image of the wild beast referred to in Revelation 13, 1 through 18, and the fulfillment of the disgusting thing that causes desolation from Matthew 24, 15, Jesus' words. Millions and millions of pages of books, magazines, brochures, I mentioned talk outlines, special talks, highlighted how evil the United Nations is, and the belief that Jehovah will use the United Nations to destroy all false religion, leaving only Jehovah's Witnesses on earth. None of them would have beards, but only JWs would survive what Jehovah was going to do and allow the United Nations to do. The society went on to teach that the United Nations will then turn against Jehovah's Witnesses to destroy them, but Jehovah will intervene and destroy all the political elements at Armageddon, including the United Nations. So they were evil. They were considered evil guy number one. Well, probably number two next to false religion, but they were evil, okay? It was pounded into our brains at every single meeting. Even as a kid, you knew, United Nations. You didn't really have a grasp of who the hell is the United Nations as a kid, but you knew they were bad. They were the tool of Satan. They promoted this stance reaching all the way back to 1919. In the November 15th, 1963 Watchtower, a resolution was written stating in part, to date, 111 nations have given worship to this political image by becoming members of it. However, we, as witnesses of the sovereign God Jehovah, will continue refusing to engage in such idolatrous worship. End quote. So, I present to you gut-wrenching shock. Imagine the ripple. Imagine the effect. And I'd love to hear from people that know what I'm talking about. Imagine the devastation when it was discovered that the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society was an associate member of the United Nations Public Information Department starting in 1992. One look at this organization's charter reveals the shocking hypocrisy of the society. Remember, you're not allowed to work out at the YMCA. Don't you dare have a goatee. You can't even be the junior high school class president. But the very representatives of God, Jesus' brothers, were associate members of the United Nations? What? For those of us that had conducted hundreds of Watchtower studies on this subject, the hypocrisy of discovering that the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society was actually a member in any level, and I'm talking cleaning their toilets because of the level of evil, any level with them, was devastating. And I personally know of many people that at that point went, okay, I might be in a cult. Because for decades I've been hearing how evil it was, only to find out that Jehovah's Witnesses were a member. Insane. It literally just blows my mind, the amount of things that I could probably list in terms of my favorite go-to hypocrisies, because there are so many of them. I'm going to give very brief honor to one that is dead serious, deadly serious, and that's the blood issue. I'm going to come back to this on another episode because this is one of those that it's very fairly stated that Jehovah's Witnesses are murderers. They kill people. You can try to dissuade it. You can try to reason this away. It isn't going to work. Now, that doesn't mean that the common Jehovah's Witness is, but leadership is. They hold responsibility, don't they? And remember, they've got all the light with Jehovah and Jesus, but the blood issue, and the pun isn't even funny, is dripping with hypocrisy. It's one of the most controversial subjects around Jehovah's Witnesses, one that I believe they would love to change. They've kind of tried to change, just as I'm about to show you, but they'll never be able to because the amount of litigation, the amount of death on their hands is staggering. It's staggering. The issue of Jehovah's Witnesses and their refusal of blood is well documented. It's one of the things they're known for. It's probably two of the things that all need their own shows: blood transfusions, refusal, and birthdays. Those are the two big ones that people go, what the hell? When they ask a kid at school. I grew up with a no blood card in my wallet since as long as I can remember. I'm going to be very, very honest and bare my soul here and confess to you that even as an elder, I was so lazy in researching the Bible's view on blood. I just accepted the direction of the faithful and discreet slave as it being a big, big no-no in any circumstance. And I locked it in a box in the back of my head and I shut the door on it. I could fill several episodes commenting on the lack of scriptural proofs surrounding refusal of blood, as well as the long history of doctrinal inventions, changes, medical studies. But I'm going to skip that for now. I can only tell you that in terms of ranking hypocrisies, there have been so many senseless deaths since the Watchtower stated it was a sin against God and disallowed blood starting in 1945. Now, if your brain is turned on at all, you immediately go, wait a minute, Stacy, 1945? What do you mean? Yeah, that's right. Again, Jesus chose this whole crew in 1919. He said, there's the smart guys. Those are my guys. Those guys. They're going to be my mouthpiece to the rest of the world. And then he proceeded to go another 20, 25 years before he mentioned, did I mention I don't want you guys to take blood? So for everyone doing it for 20, 25 years, oops, you're going to get a pass. Because I hadn't told the guys in New York yet. I was kind of sitting back watching. What? People, many of those deaths were children. God was apparently, according to the faithful and discreet slave, very confused in his messaging. Wasn't concerned about all the deaths. Because the Watchtower's view on blood has changed at a dizzying pace. I strongly encourage anyone looking into Jehovah's Witnesses to look deeply into their refusal of blood. Research deep on this subject. It was one of the most devastating, gut-wrenching things I've ever done, and I did most of it, I'm ashamed to admit to you, as a former elder, as I was on my way out the door. It's gut-wrenching. It deserves its own episode, and it isn't funny. It just isn't funny. It's horrible. It's murderous. For me, I can tell you again, because we're talking about this subject of hypocrisy, this is the one that just tears at my heart. It came down to one question for me, because I think you've picked up on this at this point. I'm more about the emotion, the nuance, the gray, the motive, the desire, than I am the analytics. So for me, after I looked at this whole matter of blood, it came down to this for me, and here was my question. And if you don't know this, again, a subject for another show. They can accept blood fractions. We've talked about this before. If you're making a ham sandwich, you can eat the bread, you can eat the lettuce, you can eat the ham, you can even eat the cheese, but what you can't eat is the ham sandwich. Yeah, let that sink in. It's so insane. But this was my question that it came down to for me. If Jehovah's Witnesses can accept blood fractions from other people's blood, why can't Jehovah's Witnesses donate their own blood for the same purpose? In other words, Jehovah's Witnesses are allowed to take other people's blood fractions, but they can't share their own blood fractions with other people. There isn't a pause long enough to even remotely touch on the level of gross hypocrisy in this entire situation. It's so beyond comprehension that any of us, and I do say us because I was there, I got baptized, that any of us bit off on this. It didn't even come into consciousness till 1945. Jesus was hanging out for 25, 26 years going, oh yeah, blood's okay. Whoops, no, wait a minute, it isn't. It isn't okay. Really? Really? People have died. The level of hypocrisy in the blood doctrine is sickening. I'm going to stop there because I'm starting to get emotional. Let's skip over to one final one here this week. And again, this is another one of those that just, there are so many. There are just so many. But here's a couple more examples. The issue of war, the issue of smoking, the issue of money, all of these are wrought with hypocrisy and continue to be to this day with Jehovah's Witnesses, which just shows you what's really driving this organizations. Jehovah's Witnesses, if you're new to them, have long held the view that they're politically neutral. They've always been vehemently against war or violence, which is a good thing. But the Watchtower and its millions of pages of publications have long preached about a future paradise where war and political upheaval won't exist. If one were to look through the past 100 years of history of the Watchtower magazine, you would almost think that war was a pet subject of this organization. I mean, magazine and book campaign after tract after special campaign after tract after magazine are filled with illustrations showing a future Earth void of war, everybody walking around in a sweet pressed pair of khakis, you ladies with a beautiful dress, with a lion, but now dogs are on leashes. That's an interesting one that just came out. But it shows a future world completely absent of war. Millions of pages devoted to this. And yet, if you go back and look into their history, folks, I'm going to tell you something right now. You're going to find out that they've been involved in some ways in war. The organization has even gone so far as condemning R-rated movies featuring war and shunning those that have military jobs. Some have lost finances, jobs. They couldn't take certain jobs during World Wars I and II, especially World War II, Vietnam. People on this issue of neutrality in Malawi and Mexico and Russia. I'm missing so many. People have lost their lives on this, staying neutral. So I can only tell you that in terms of hypocrisy, imagine my shock when I found out after digging around between 2007 2009 on my way out the door, on my fast fade, slow fade, whatever you want to call it, I was shocked to find out that the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society literally owns shares of military stocks, including major weapon manufacturers. I took a careful look into SEC documentation because that's just the way I roll. And I found that the Watchtower Society owned over 5 million shares of Randcam Engine Corporation, which is known primarily for manufacturing military weapons. Now they came out, they tried to adjust it, and we inherited this stock. We didn't know. Folks, you get pulled into the B school for French kissing, for smoking a cigarette, for playing sports, or suggesting you want to go to college. They own over 5 million shares in a military weapon manufacturer. Another example, if that wasn't enough, their strong campaign against smoking as a sin against God resulted in all sorts of people leaving the organization. Either that or hiding the habit. A few of which I know right now that were recently appointed as ministerial servants that were smoking last time they were hanging around me, baptized witnesses, or even being disfellowshipped, where they lose all contact with family and those that they love. Only to discover that the Watchtower Society also owns stock in the Philip Morris Company. Maybe you've heard of them, one of the world's largest cigarette manufacturers. The list in terms of stock, finances, money, war, cigarettes. It goes on and on. In fact, at one point, they owned stock in video game companies, something that they openly condemned in the Watchtower in all their young people asks and youth-related material now. They also owned stock for the longest time in one of the world's largest oil companies, as if, I guess, suddenly ruining the earth became okay. There is such a level of hypocrisy within Jehovah's Witnesses. There is literally a list that's close to endless. Close to endless. And if you're somebody who's just associated with them, you're not even allowed to ask questions. Because if you do, you'll be labeled as someone that is heading towards hypocrisy. I love the quote from Molière when he said, "One should examine oneself for a very long time before thinking of condemning others." This group of men in upstate New York, those 8 guys, they claim they're going to judge the rest of us with Jesus. The rest of the 144,000 who are just, I guess, not that important anymore, but they'll be in heaven. They're going to rain fireballs down on all of us. Even as an elder, I was always contemplating why we spent so much time bashing other religions and people. It just reeked of insecurity to me. I would obtain the new public talk outline, which is given every Sunday in Kingdom Halls. It used to be 45 minutes long, folks. Now I think it's, 20? And I used to just marvel at the material. Several of the outlines I gave would begin with a mandated 20-minute diatribe that consisted of heavy bashing of Christendom, as well as any other religion. 20 solid minutes of why everybody else is wrong and how Jehovah's going to destroy them and let the animals eat their guts. This was never more true than the special talk outlines in the mid-2000s, which were typically a week or two after the memorial celebration. It too is one of my hypocrisies. I couldn't find a single instance in the Bible, despite reading it many times, where Jesus Christ sat around bashing other religions for 20, 30 minutes. Now look, he went after the Jews. They were apostates. We kind of talked about that. But he didn't do this. The service meeting, the Watchtower study, even the theocratic school, all defunct. The book study, defunct. It's amazing how much this religion's changed. They were all formatted in much the same way. It amounted to hours and hours of us saying, we're right, you're wrong, and Jehovah's going to rip your guts out and feed you to the birds while we live in paradise. None of this is encouraging to most. However, it provided a mind-numbing distraction from the realities of this organization. With so much of our time spent showing the warts on every other organization or every other religion, the crowd of Jehovah's Witnesses that showed up to a meeting and now come to Zooms or go in field service or stand next to a book cart, rarely prepared or studied, and miss all of these wrongs, all of these hypocrisies, all of this history that's been buried, and all the other serious crimes committed by this organization. And you just marvel at it, not in a good way. The common Jehovah's Witness spends zero time, examining this religion's history of error, hypocrisy, or ever-changing doctrines. They don't do it. They just literally sit there and lap it up. Those that don't, leave. We're apostates, lost a lot, friends, maybe our social circle, maybe jobs, maybe family. The rest of them just give the organization a pass as we talked about a little bit, new light. And what's interesting with, we listed 2 or 3 heavy hypocrisies in this episode. There are so many, and they're going to be fun pet projects moving forward, pet subjects, I should say. But even with the proliferation, I should say, of the internet and all this information being so easily accessible, the Watchtower now has gone into overdrive to bury its past. Oftentimes, things that are only a couple of years old. I mean, the Revelation Climax book, we studied that 2-3 times in the book study. Not only is the book study gone, so's the book. It was life and death to be there and get that stuff. But they've buried it now. They've taken long heralded publications out of print, the Insight book, the yearbooks. They've made them inaccessible to their own people and never discuss all their ongoing legal troubles around the world with child pedophilia, the protection of abusers. Now all they do is heavily push their website. Just 10 years ago, they were condemning the internet as a dangerous place. But as of today, not only are they all over the internet and pushing jw.org, but they have a television studio. If you haven't seen it, pretty nice. Pretty nice. It's absolutely insane when you look at it. Absolutely insane. It's interesting to note that the Bible really talks a lot about hypocrisy. And you kind of wonder, did Jesus just miss it with these guys? Or the people? At Revelation 22:15, it says, those not permitted to enter, that is the kingdom, living forever, are outside. And who's number one on the list? The hypocrites. Right up there with the sexually immoral, the sorcerers, the murderers, the idolaters, and every lover of lies. Lies. Hypocrisy is rooted in lies. So the Bible condemns them for their own behavior. The problem with hypocrisy among Jehovah's Witnesses, and again, I'd love to hear from those that have lived through this as well, is that they really take a stance that says, well, look, you're all evil and ignorant, but us, well, we made a few mistakes. The light got brighter. We covered that in a past episode. The light just keeps brighter. Well, light doesn't get brighter when it was, never light. It was just a lie. It was just incorrect. It's not light, so it can't get brighter. Much of what I've shared on this week's episode is known by many that have left the organization, but I can tell you what's really shocking and eats at me is that very little is new information. And so many that we love and respect are still there living this life of hypocrisy. They don't have facial hair. They can't go to the YMCA. They dare not vote or even be school class president, but their leaders are members of the United Nations. The leadership of Jehovah's Witnesses has gone out of their way for over a century now to separate themselves from all the other institutions of the earth, anybody with authority. They've used the Bible, along with all of its prophecies, to try proving that they alone, the 8 guys in upstate New York, they alone have God's blessing. Aside from a great deal of supposition and fabrication and fantasy, they have failed miserably to uphold some of the most basic tenets of Christianity. In fact, if you delve deeper into this organization, you'll find that the Watchtower and the Faithful and Discreet Slave, they don't differ from any other multi-million-dollar business. They have corporate takeovers, they have lawsuits, they got scandal, they got sexual impropriety. You name it, it's all there for someone that's really just willing to read. Just look at a document, visit a landmark. But most simply won't put out the effort. That's all it is. They stick to the society's mantra, you're all evil, we've just made a few mistakes, we're still God's chosen one. So whether somebody wants to chalk it up to laziness or being too meek or not caring, the facts show that the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society and Jehovah's Witnesses are nose deep in hypocrisy. From the foundation of the religion, from the beginning, from all of their predictions failing miserably, from generations changing 6 times, from beards to no beards, from paradise with lions running free to now dogs must be on a leash. Some are just going to ignore the damage it has done to countless lives, to psyches, to families. Some even go so far as to choose to ignore the resulting deaths. However, not all of us will. For the truly thinking person, I've always loved this quote. It's from Aldous Huxley in his complete essays to 1926 to 1929. He says very simply, and I absolutely apply this to every person trapped within Jehovah's Witnesses. He says, quote, "Facts do not cease to exist because they are ignored." End quote. The fact is this: we have a little bit of fun. We laugh at some of this. Facial hair is, it's pretty serious business. Going to the YMCA is pretty serious business. I could show you all sorts of counsel about holding your mate's hand while praying. Women wearing napkins on their head because they're teaching in front of a male. On and on it goes. But the hypocrisy starts at the top within Jehovah's Witnesses. So we're going to try to have some fun with it, and we're going to try to honor those that have succumbed to it. And that's not to say, I want to emphasize this as we close out this week, that all Jehovah's Witnesses are bad. That is so not true. Not even remotely. There's wonderful, loving, caring, motivated people among Jehovah's Witnesses. But if you go to the top, you're going to find something completely different. It's that simple. To quote Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. It's that simple. You claim to be Jesus' right-hand man, you better be teaching the right stuff. But they're not. So hopefully you had some fun with some of those examples. I wanted to just cover Hypocrisy 101. My list is so long. It's so long. But I just thought we'd cover a couple funny ones, maybe some that were a little more serious. And hopefully if you're somebody that's listening to this, you're on the fence or you're trying to do research, I'm going to say this, I'm going to start saying this in every episode. You don't need this podcast. You don't need an apostate mentor. You don't need a bad association. You don't need any of that. All you need to do is read your own literature. That's it. It's all right there. And I will give you this warning. Don't go asking the elders for it. As soon as you start asking about old literature or things that are gone, they will immediately, if nothing else, make a mental note that you're on your way to apostasy. They'll keep an eye on you. You'll be the subject of an elders meeting. I can tell you members of my own family, while I sat in the room, were subjects of elders meetings because they would question things. Despite the fact that, again, we started out with a scripture there in 1 John, which says, test it. Test these expressions. Test if they're true. Jehovah's Witnesses don't want you to test that. Not the guys at the top. Not the 8 guys in New York. So I thank you all for another fantastic episode and joining me. For those listening, I guess it's I'm ahead of the ball here. But I appreciate all the comments, all the DMs. We're going to keep this thing rolling. Like I've been doing for weeks. It's just been a very busy period outside of the podcast. I am going to have some guests, some wonderful people I've reconnected with. We're going to have a lot of laughs. I really want to dig into the history of people that grew up in the 70s, 80s, 90s, became servants who are now out. We have such a unique journey. I mean, we lived through everything. We lived through the conventions when they were in stadiums, and we lived through cheese danishes and vanilla pudding. We lived through Michael Jackson and Prince. We lived through some really fun and interesting stuff, in the very least. So we're going to get those folks on, men and women, people I love and respect, and actually some people I just want to get to know better. So stay tuned on that. So again, I want to thank you all for joining us. Like, subscribe. We are on YouTube. We're on all the major podcast networks, Spotify, Apple, iTunes. Would love to get feedback. This is about hanging out and really helping others in a completely casual way. My goal is, if one person hears this and is saved from this ridiculously damaging cult, I've done everything I'd hoped to do, everything I've set out to do. So thanks for joining me this week on the Surviving Paradise podcast, where we just find our way right through that wonderful spiritual paradise provided by the faithful and discreet slave of Jehovah's Witnesses. Thanks again, folks. We will see you next week.